Good morning and welcome to our webinar series on recovery and resiliency on Main Street. I am Kimberly Parsons Whitaker. Next slide, please. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns that fuel our state's prosperity. Our mission is to assess, to educate, to convene, and to advocate to develop and grow our traditional downtowns, village centers, and our urban mixed-use neighborhoods. Given the impact of and the challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the theme for our programming this year is recovery and resiliency on Main Street. Today's session will run approximately 1 hour. Other housekeeping, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat function as we go. We'll be monitoring the chat box and we'll have our presenter address questions when we pause for Q&A. A recording of today's session will be available on our website at ctmainstreet.org, as are all of our workshop archives. And you'll receive a brief evaluation in the next day or so. We greatly appreciate your input so that we can continually improve these sessions. Evaluations are required for AICP CM credits. Next slide, please. We are grateful to our sponsors. Our educational programs, Main Street Forums for the 21st Century, are sponsored by Webster Bank, Avangrid, and Farmington Bank Community Foundation. Next slide. Our corporate investors are People's United Bank, Capital for Change, Windsor Federal, and M&T Bank. Next slide. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. Our growth partners are Avangrid and the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office. Next slide. Connecticut Main Street Center also has important strategic partnerships, including our new partnership with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, for which we provide educational programs that qualify for the Certified Connecticut Municipal Official Program. And our AICP certification maintenance provider is Fitzgerald and Halliday, Inc. Next slide. Today's program, Overcoming Leasing Obstacles, will feature Connecticut Main Street professional affiliate member and interior designer Jennifer Gaggion of Design Your Monday, LLC. With your Main Street property owners in mind, Jennifer's presentation will cover strategic design opportunities, property development and leasing, and driving business owner revenue through design. Jennifer's also going to include some case studies from office and mixed use scenarios. And it is my pleasure to hand this over to our presenter today, Jennifer Gaggion.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you for everybody who is joining us today. Hope you find some useful information. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I have somewhat of an untraditional background in design. I actually have spent the majority of my career in human resources and have expertise in strategic planning, project management, and organizational development. Through my years, I decided to parlay that experience and really bring that into a passion of mine, which was then to integrate business with design. And so I have a different lens of looking at design from the business side, as well as what many people know interior design to be as with the cosmetic side. I like to say that I help businesses, whether you are an actual business owner or a property owner, transform your workspace to align with the quality of their products and tell your brand story. If you're here today, it's probably because some of the learning objectives appealed to you in some way. And so what we'll focus on is why interior design should be considered part of your leasing strategy. We'll talk about the visual impact a space has on what could be otherwise potentially interested real estate brokers, lessees, and investors. How property owners can expand their reach and create spaces that appeal to a broader leasing population, and how expectations have changed as a result of COVID. When we think about design, a lot of people think of the cosmetic component only, but I like to talk a little bit more strategic because there are many areas where design can influence the work that you're doing as property and business owners. So what I'd like to focus on is evaluating investment cost, adaptive reuse, single to multiple tenant occupancy considerations, and then of course, exterior and interior design. When we start with evaluating investment cost, it's actually a number of things. And first and foremost, you need to understand the market value. But then we look at cash flow. And as an owner or a business owner, a business or property owner, you may not necessarily be opposed to investing in the property, but oftentimes we wait to make those improvements until a tenant is identified or until we feel a little bit more comfortable that we have somebody occupying the space. The challenge with that is it's a missed opportunity because what we don't consider is the cost of the property being vacant for a period of time. And so the longer the property stays vacant, the less income you also have coming in to maximize that value. Another area where you can be beneficial is to be aware of financial tax credits that could apply to your project or that could apply to the target audience that you're trying to attract. Now, I will be the first to say I am no expert, nor do I want to be on any of these tax credits. However, I know enough to say they exist and to identify partners who can help me help my clients. And the reason that's important is because if you have a tenant who can use some of these credits, it actually can enhance the capital they can bring into the project and can make the deal more lucrative for everybody. To give you an example, on the interior side, I recently worked with an organization who was making a large furniture purchase, and we had some insight into the fact that they could potentially qualify for a tax exemption as it related to their furniture purchase because of a renovation that they were doing. And mind you, the furniture purchase was quite large, but ultimately they were able to save over $30,000 in tax money. And the benefit to that was clearly that then allowed them to outfit even more spaces than they had initially intended to, because they were able to reinvest that money back into their budget. Another consideration in evaluating investment cost is to understand the life cycle cost of the products or materials that you want to use when refurbishing your properties. So oftentimes I see clients considering the least expensive item at that moment in time with no consideration for what the true cost is over the life cycle of the property or of a given product's lifespan. So for example, I like to use the example of paint. In some high traffic areas, paint is going to cost you more than if you just did an initial investment up front with some type of wall covering. And when we talk about wall covering, sometimes I just actually had a client yesterday say wall covering. It's not the flowered wall covering that was in all of our kitchens as children. There are just plain generic wall coverings that can enhance your space, but as a property owner, allow you to step away and not worry about the wear and tear of high traffic areas as time goes on. Another consideration in evaluating investment cost is to use the resources. So when we talk about the tax credits, certainly Connecticut Main Street can be a reference for you. I believe that there are some affiliates who actually can provide some of that expertise. I myself also work with businesses whose sole function is to evaluate financial credits that companies might be available for. In terms of adaptive reuse allows us to focus on restoration and revitalization without necessarily really spending huge investment costs in the property. So when we talk about reuse, we look at identifying what the next best use and the next best tenant could be in the property. For example, the picture that you see here is located in New Britain, and there was retail on the first floor and offices were initially on the second floor. After evaluating the property, it was deemed to be more lucrative to transform those offices into apartments based on the changing atmosphere in the city. Rebranding. So I'll talk a little bit later about branding your property and what it means to brand and the benefits. But when you're thinking about how to use your property, you also want to position it as what you think it could be. So instead of just focusing on its existing use, focusing on, or in essence, telling the story of what your property can be, helps potential buyers, helps potential lessees begin to digest the story of that property in another fashion that may not have been previously considered. And then lastly, we talk about repurpose. So whenever it makes sense, we want to use existing structure. And so the nature of design and space planning, that I'll talk about a little bit more later, is to maximize what exists. There's no reason to create the wheel, recreate the wheel in all cases. And we want to make sure that we are thinking of best possible ways to repurpose those investment dollars. A good example of repurposing is this Macy's in Waterford. It's the Crystal Mall. Recently, it was announced that that Macy's is going to be utilized as Amazon warehouse space. So I think we're going to start to see a little bit more of this because obviously malls are changing and evolving. So we really need to understand and think creatively about different ways we can use existing properties. I think it's especially important as we consider this impact of COVID. So a question that is important to ask yourselves as a result of COVID is my property still relevant with its given use? And given the nature of change that we're all experiencing, what might be more relevant? Single to multiple occupancy is an important consideration as well, because for starters, smaller spaces can often generate additional rental income. So it may be unreasonable for you to expect to land the same size tenant that you had previously, especially with the advent of COVID and the consideration that we can all work remotely, right? We can all work remotely. A 20,000 square foot office may be more practical to be divided into multiple office spaces. And so as a property owner, some of the things we want to be able to do in advance of this is to think about the impact that that has on our space and begin to think about how we might separate utilities. What are multiple egresses that we would need to meet code and where could they possibly be located? And then think about common areas. So if you have multiple tenants occupying a space, how can you create these common areas to accommodate the multiple tenants? The other component is to increase rentable space. So This is where the nature of space planning really is advantageous, because it allows you to look at your space holistically and consider otherwise useless spaces to really contribute to profit generating real estate. As we get more towards the design side, with my background in HR, I have spent a lot of time in my career speaking about the emotional component of business, and design is really the same. So your site emits feelings, the color, fonts, cleanliness, these all speak to potential lessees' emotions of a space. Buyers, lessees, they want to feel a vibe in a space. And when you think about it that way, curb appeal is the first impression that they receive of the property. So as an owner, you might see landscape as an added expense, but the curb appeal generates interest. It also speaks to the engagement of the landlord or the seller, and helps a potential buyer or lessee to create really their own story of the property. They begin to envision themselves there because they can connect with what they're seeing on the exterior. Another component that I talk about with my clients is a phased approach. So yes, all of these things are going to take some level of investment, but the bottom line is not everything has to be done at once. And so when people see improvements being done, that also is a message that speaks to potential clients. Signage and your branding also speak to different demographics, and we'll talk a little bit about the signage in a minute. But all of these exterior elements are components that you want to consider early on, because as people are driving by, as you're marketing the property, these are some of the first things that potential buyers can see. And so making those investments on the upfront really helps just kick off the promotion of your properties. So if you are branding your product, I say product, but if you're branding your property, the branding basically also supports this feeling of a business, and also begins to tell a story of you, the seller, and what it is, your style is within. It creates a memorable impression of the space. So if we take a look at some of these signages, I have to move my camera here, but you can see some different images and just the initial emotional impact that they might have. So in the top left corner, I'm sure Steve Stussy is a really nice guy, but it's a little bit salesy and somewhat presumptuous to have his face on this billboard on the side of the road. And I don't necessarily think that that is what is driving somebody to the space. The for sale commercial property, is really kind of old traditional fonts, and the price reduced is, again, a little bit of a salesy type of approach that is telling a message that may not be your best foot forward as a property owner. Whereas the signage on the bottom has cleaner fonts, I'll call them more modern fonts, because fonts do have an age, and really simple colors, soothing colors that somewhat pique your curiosity. Another benefit here is on this renovation coming soon, showing a render of your property shares the vision for the property, and also tries to also displays the improvements that the owner tends to make for the space. As it relates to the interior design, even if a space is not built out, working through several different potential floor plans in advance of having a tenant gives you as the property owner the ability to talk about the property in different ways. And so it helps you with your presentation. It helps you think outside the box. Tenants have ever-evolving demands, as we all are aware, and we want to be able to focus on the flexibility of our buildings and how we can meet their demands. Some of the things that we're seeing now that are important to tenants is sufficient power to capitalize on emerging technologies, especially with the advent of Zoom and the pull on our systems, adequate parking in the space, efficient LED lighting. On a building that I recently was a part of a renovation, I believe it was something like 30 old fluorescent lights replaced one LED light. So it's huge in terms of efficiency. Temperature control, access to public transportation. I don't think anybody post-COVID is going to want to work in a space that doesn't have windows anymore, with natural light and fresh air. Filtration systems are a big deal now, improved restrooms, break rooms, privacy. In terms of interior design, also staging to appeal, right? So who are you talking to and what are you doing to attract those potential clients? So one thing that we see in younger lessees is connectivity. So they like these social hubs that bring people together, kind of this joint collaborative area or a small cafe. People sometimes think this means every workplace, every property needs to look like a Google property, and that's just not the case. It's just really getting into the core of different generations, different individuals' needs. So for example, seniors, obviously safety is going to be at the forefront of their mind. And how are you best representing or displaying safety in your properties? Single occupant versus a family, or an independent business versus a company. These are all different types of personas that have different needs. So getting or tapping into what makes each of them tick and the importance of each is critical as you think about how you're presenting your property. And of course, this expectations as a result of COVID, right? Everything's changed. And safety, cleanliness is at the forefront of everybody's minds. We're going to see this ever-growing change as it relates to COVID, where we may not be as buttoned up as we are today, but undoubtedly there will be a heightened emphasis on safety, cleanliness, and personal space as we move forward. I want to take you through two case studies of projects that I've worked on, and these are in smaller downtown areas. The first is a project I worked on with an owner in Meriden. So this was a building on a corner right near Mid-State Medical Center and the Meriden Mall. It was at a traffic light. There was great visibility. There was a bus stop right at this property, which was an added benefit, and had high traffic through it. The owner paid about $390,000 for the property, and that was basically about less than $30 a square foot. So when we look at the outside, I just want to kind of give you some insight into this picture. These trees were actually all over here. So this picture, if you can see my mouse, is after all of these trees were taken down. And right behind these trees is the intersection of the Meriden Mall over here and then Mid-State Medical about a quarter mile or less up the street. Some of the challenges that we faced with this property, first and foremost, was visual appeal. I don't know who wants to come in and see this big honking piece of metal. There was this ugly rundown fence. There was what appeared to be some sort of ticket booth. I have no idea for what, outside of the property. So it was just plain old ugly. Space planning was another issue. It was an old call center. So if you can just picture big open spaces with rows and rows of cubes, that was basically what the interior of the space looked like. Code compliance, the building was built in the 70s, and so we were certain that there were code improvements that needed to be addressed. And then identifying target markets. So for a 14,000 square foot space, who could potentially be interested in a building like this, especially near the medical center and by the mall. On the exterior, in terms of visual appeal, there was no windows, right? And this is even pre-COVID, but even at that time we knew that that was not going to help us. Overgrown and outdated landscape. So here you can see the bushes that, along with the wallpaper we talked about earlier, is probably the same bushes we all had in our families' homes when we were growing up. And I can't necessarily see it in this picture, but there was an empty flagpole and there was trash all around the property. This was the result of some of the improvements that we made. And as I just take you through some of it, windows obviously were one of the bigger improvements, but on a more minor level, one of the first things that the owner did was put a new crisp American flag on the pole. And it may not seem like a big deal, but that alone began to show passerbys that there was an interest and a commitment and a sense of pride that was going into the property. The windows obviously was a no-brainer. It was just unacceptable in today's age. The metal was something that we just painted. So funny story, I had said the metal needed to be painted from day one, and the owner said, no, it was an expense. And as the building came together, it was just evident that it needed to be black. And so it brought a crisp look, just brought the property all together. And then we had a landscape designer create a plan. And when we talk about that, you know, one way to save money, because I know oftentimes we talk about either individual investors or we talk about smaller property owners, where we were able to save money, we did. So while we invested in hiring a landscape designer, the owner hired independent workers to install and plant all of the plantings. And it was a great way to really get the most bang for the investment. From the interior perspective, there was an unwelcoming lobby. And let me just first say that this picture you're seeing is not even when we first entered. So this is actually somewhat improved. There was a kitchen back here that was old and there was cabinets falling apart. You can see the dirty carpet was everywhere. There was dirty ceiling tiles, the walls were dirty, everything was just dingy and gross. It had been vacant for a number of years. I referenced earlier the lighting, and so fluorescent lighting was everywhere. What we did with this property is to stage it, and so the improvements really happened over time. When we talk about some of those initial cash flow investments and staging the property, it really is considering what's important to stage and sell. So In this case, what I advise the client is, let's invest in the things that we know you're going to have to do at some point anyway. We're just going to do them up front. And that sense calms the spend, if you will, because you're going to spend the money at some point as the property owner. Nobody is going to rent this space from you. It's just thinking about the timing of that cash flow. So the space, what we did, this is a final picture in terms of once we had a tenant. However, I'll share with you a little bit about what we did to stage it. So we painted this wall to stage it. We covered the old brick. The building, as I said, was built in the 70s. There was concrete masonry unit everywhere. So we sheetrocked the concrete masonry on the exterior walls because we knew that that would soften the internal feel of the space. We ripped out all of the old dirty carpet. We did not invest in new carpet because keep in mind at that time, we didn't even know what a floor plan would look like because we weren't sure what kind of tenants we would have. But what we did instead was we had a number of carpet samples, flooring options laid out so that when potential tenants or lessees would come in, they saw options that they could have a choice in installing, having the owner install. And so they got a sense of the quality of the products. Another thing we did to stage was we immediately painted all of the mullions around the courtyard black. It gave fresh paint, it brought a modern appeal. So even though we did have to repaint them at the end because they had taken quite a bit of abuse through the process, that was an investment that made sense in the scheme of the overall investment potential. The other thing that we did was improve the outdoor courtyard. So this courtyard, if I just go back for a minute, you can see that there's a courtyard over here. And so this is basically a square of the interior side of the building. And so with the same landscape designer, we had ripped out all of the old overgrown trees and bushes that were there, and we put in a new plan. Another way that we are able to maximize is, if you see here, this is an old cement pad. There was another cement pad over here. If we were starting with a white paper, we probably would not put a cement pad. We'd use the stone throughout the entire space. But because we were looking to maximize investment and really capitalize on what previously existed, we just incorporated that existing cement into the space. Moving on to space planning. So the plan in front of you here is basically what the ultimate tenant plan looked like. But if I just talk through some of these components, the green was existing, and so these offices existed in this capacity. So when we ultimately did land that tenant, this was something that we kept as is, and we used all of this existing structure. This area here in the red was all open. These were those initial cubicles that you had seen at the beginning. When we were staging the property, what we had done is we had 4 different layouts that potential lessees could see. And the reason we did that was because we wanted people to envision what the space could look like. So we were showing them where common areas could be. We were showing them what a 2,500 square feet or a 5,000 square feet space could look like. Because remember, we talked about at that time, we were not certain that we were going to be able to land one tenant for the entire space. In the kitchen, We took out a number of, we took out all of the old cabinetry, and we decided to relocate the kitchen. The kitchen was huge. It was not going to make sense to use that much square footage if we were working towards multiple tenants. And so we wound up considering moving that space to a smaller area over here. I'll talk a minute about how we were able to make this old mechanical room profitable square footage. I'll show you an image of that. Actually, it might be next. So we had an old mechanical room, and basically we were able to convert that to 3 bathrooms. And we did that after we did have the tenant identified. It was a rehabilitation center that ultimately leased the space. But I think more important is the financial impact. So we took 750 square feet of this outdated mechanical room, and we turned it into 3 patient bathrooms. So what that yielded to the owner was an additional $15,000 in rental income a year. So instead, what we did was install an efficient rooftop HVAC unit. Again, an expense up front. The HVAC was a huge expense, maybe one of the biggest, and but he knew he was going to have to do it. And so the first was to identify that we would be able to reuse this space. And then the second was to really plan out how he would invest in that expense. Code compliance. There's a number of components when it comes to code, and this is far from a complete list. But just as a general kind of like rule of thumb, some of the initial things that we're looking for is ADA accessibility. We're looking for different means of egress. And in general, what does the plumbing look like? So those were just some things that at a quick view, we knew were going to need some attention. And then as we progressed through the process, as we were able to land a tenant and begin to really work towards an actual build out of the space, that's when we got an architect involved to help us complete a code review and really make sure all of our I's were dotted. Identifying target markets. So Connecticut Main Street, if I can give a little bit of a shameless plug, is a really great resource. And one of the connections that I had made through my own networking was the folks at Making Meriden. And Making Meriden is a downtown organization. Unfortunately, they didn't get their funding this year due to COVID, but we're really optimistic that they will come back next year. But using the local town officials, using these professionals helped us understand what the vision of the town was, and basically helped us craft our own story for identifying target markets. In addition to that, they did a lot of wonderful things for us in terms of helping to promote the building at multiple events. They educated us about resources that were available. And so in addition to that support, we were then able to say, okay, if this is the story of the town, how does the story of this building fit into the story of the town? And so as a result, the owner focused not only on medical facilities, but medical offices, and then also general office lessees. The result is a pretty successful story, and one that we are proud to share. Because the building was purchased at such a favorable cost, the owner was able to offer additional incentives that made securing a lease really favorable. At the end of the day, he was able to secure a single tenant, which was great, and signed a 13-year lease. So now the building's for sale, right? So in the world of renovations, it's how it goes. You kind of put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and then you send it off into the world to be its next home. But one of the kind of anecdotal stories I want to just share about the impact of property improvement in the community is, so the tenant I mentioned was a rehab facility. And so there was some concern that the town may not embrace that type of facility coming in. But by the time the town had their approval meeting, there was actually people standing up saying, we have seen the progress of that building. It's been an eyesore for years. And we're confident that whoever goes in there is going to be reputable in terms of their contributions to the community, because we've seen that transformation happen. And so above all, anything I can say, that was really a great testament to the story of this property. Moving on to my next case study was a property that I had worked on in the town of Marlborough, Connecticut. This was a former Mark's on Main restaurant. And up here on the second floor, there was 2 apartments for lease. So when the owner got me involved, we had seen this as an opportunity to bring some additional dining, maybe a bakery or like a lunch spot into the town. In recent years, Marlborough had seen the addition of a Big Y supermarket where previously there was none, and the Marlborough Tavern, which was, kind of their newest hotspot, trendy tavern type, pub type food. So the challenge with some of our initial goals in identifying these target markets was that the numbers were just not going to make sense for these smaller businesses. And so we had to really think differently. Ultimately, the first floor space was leased to a restaurant owner. And in this project, I actually worked with the building owner as well as the restaurant owner. And the way that I got involved with the restaurant owner was, everybody knows that restaurants are somewhat of a risky business. And the owner had talked to the restaurant owner to say the importance of really going out with a bang and creating the right brand for the restaurant. Even though the town was small and there's not a lot of restaurants, the Marlborough Tavern was really like the best thing to hit Marlborough in the last several years, and was really visually appealing and has a great vibe. The other restaurant in town, excuse me, is called Sadler's. And it's kind of an institution in the town, owned by a local family, and just really great food, great people. And so they had that type of competition. This particular restaurant owner was a case of, there's no money for design. I'll just do it as I go. Excuse me. Which is a dangerous proposition, because in design, you can always implement in a phased approach, but you need to understand where you're going before you begin to phase it. And so at least coming up with a holistic plan of who you want to be is really critical in setting forth on the right path. So in this study, while I focus my partnership on the developer, I wanted to just share a different perspective of working with the restaurant owner. One of the key things I tell my clients is let your real estate work for you. So your real estate is probably one of your top 3 line items on any P&L. And so you can't just look at it as an expense. You have to garner some sort of income generation from it. And how do you do that? You focus on function, you focus on branding, and you create some mood. Through this, with function, we want to identify the best use of space to generate the revenue. We want to promote through distinctive design, and we want to create a mood or a vibe that appeals to our target audience. This is an example of what the interior of the restaurant looked like. And so pre-tenant, okay, we knew, again, the owner had to invest in some initial improvements. So cleaning out the space, just getting it to a place of just neutral, if you will, was important. Looking at the exterior and focusing on adding the siding and some exterior improvements was another thing. Again, ultimately, we knew we were going to have to do that. So getting that going and putting on that cosmetic face was important at the onset. This was the floor plan for the second floor that we came up with. So the floor plan was a little bit of a disaster in the sense that originally this living space was a bathroom, and this space up here was the living room. So the flow was kind of wonky. The kitchen was gross. And so we changed that to be a more useful space plan to today's target, right? We want open concept, and we made these 2 bedrooms. When we talk about branding, we have to answer some questions before you embark on a design process. And so you want to understand who your ideal customer is, who's your competition, and how you want your clients to feel. These are all things that really help your clients build trust. So identifying your story at the start is a huge component of branding. With the restaurant owner, we talked through what they wanted to achieve. And this was just some concepts that I had come up with as it relates to the things that they told me. So they were, they had an Italian heritage. They had kind of this old world Italian feel. They said there has to be arches in the place. Arches just speak Italian to us. Their last name is Mangiafico. Fico in Italian means fig. And so that was important as well. And so we use these types of concepts to just help them envision the space. I also worked with them on branding. And again, while I am not a graphic designer and I'm not a branding expert, I know enough to help my customers get off the ground. And then we take it to work with a graphic designer or marketing professional to expand upon the brand. The final result was to really create the mood and bring in the emotion. So what behavior did we want to evoke? In here, we wanted a cozy setting. We wanted them to feel like they had this kind of old world, rustic Italian feel. And we also wanted to capitalize on our competitors' strengths and weaknesses. That was an example of the bar. And the name of this restaurant is actually Zina's Cucina in Marlborough. I will put in a plug for them because the food is amazing and they are a wonderful family-owned business. They are rocking it right now. And part of what kind of really led to some of this success was the property owners started talking about this property before they even knew who the tenant was, and talking about the improvements. And in a small town like Marlborough, that type of appeal caught on fast and really got the town excited. So by the time we even named who a tenant was, the town was pretty much chomping at the bit to see what was going to go into this great renovation that was happening in the center of their town. Here's a look at the before of the apartments. And so here's the kitchen of one apartment that we were able to transform. And we tried to do 2 different types of looks in each of the apartments. So we did this industrial type of apartment, and then we also did what we're calling kind of our modern apartment. And that gives you a before and after of the properties. So again, another great story. In this case, the owner actually, the restaurant owner has approached the building owner to purchase the building. So that transaction probably will happen at some point over the course of the next 6 months. And so again, another success story that we're proud to share. So this was just a recent picture. I haven't had this professionally done yet. And so that's just gives you an idea with their awning, and we'll get some professional pictures taken soon. And thank you. As an investor, as a property owner, as a commercial broker, I can support your business in ways that might be outside of how you've traditionally thought of interior designers. So I'm happy to discuss strategic opportunities, to discuss, to review how your properties can work for you and get them leased. Thanks for your time today, and I'll turn it over to Kimberly.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Great images, excellent information. So thank you for putting that presentation together. We just have a few minutes, but some questions for you. And again, for everyone, the questions will be part of the recording. So never fear if you have to get off early. So the first question, as an owner, what can I do to support the success of a prospective client or tenant?
Great. I think as an owner, what's important to recognize is that your role goes beyond the property, right? So what can you do to support your tenant? And in the case of Marlborough, I think what the great story was is that by creating this excitement about the property before there was even a tenant, it was such a natural transition for the tenant to kind of walk into these open arms. So there's, whether you have the tenant or not, there's value in you sharing excitement, sharing the improvements, because not only is it selling to a prospective tenant, it's also creating a path for their success.
Good. You talked about the emotion, what is evoked in a space, whether that's negative or positive. So
no
again,
offense to Steve, right? No offense. I hope nobody knows
Steve. Yeah, Steve is great, but whether it's a property owner or a business owner, what emotion, if I'm putting myself in that position, what emotion am I trying to create within a space? How do you help property and business owners think through that process?
I think before you get to the emotion, you have to identify who's your target market and what's important to them. So, you know, some of the things that we're talking about kind of integrate, like space planning and emotion. I know I heard, like with the Cult building, for example, right? They were leasing to independent single occupants, and that was what was important to that crowd, right? So an apartment similar to what I showed that we did in Marlborough is probably an emotion, something clean, fresh, new, modern is what they want to see. However, with the advent of COVID and working from home, people don't want to do all of their work in one bedroom. And so now we're also seeing this need for 2 bedrooms. So understanding the target market allows you to think about the emotion, think about the space planning, and really focus on the needs, the true needs of the profile you're trying to attract.
Good. At what point in the process of this should you, or should interior design, specifically you, when should you be brought into the process?
Yesterday.
Okay, fair
In
enough.
most cases. I think that, hopefully what I conveyed today is that there is opportunity from the beginning. So the planning process, for starters, when we even talk about cosmetics, is weeks, right? So if you're really looking at full-on finishes and furnishings, things like that, weeks. But when you are just thinking about how you're going to consider your space, it's not too early to bring an interior designer in, because there is value that can be had. There is value that can be garnered by the space planning alone and identifying the target markets.
Yeah, exactly. It goes to, the branding process and identifying target markets. It's never too early. That's where it really starts, isn't it? Good.
Right.
Okay, so I'm looking at the time and I know we need to wrap this up. So Jen, if you could advance the slide and I'll share some information with our viewers.
There we go.
It'll come up. So once again, thank you so much, Jennifer. Such valuable information, and thank you for being so generous with your time. Once again, for everyone, a recording of today's session will be available on our website very shortly. That's ctmainstreet.org, where you can also find a great deal of information, no matter what stage of revitalization you're in. For instance, you can access our Reopen Downtown video series. This is produced by another one of our professional affiliates, Arnett Muldrow and Associates. These are short videos that can be watched at any time. We encourage you to share them with your local businesses. The topics include how to establish an e-commerce presence, social media for small businesses, social media for downtown programs, and then tips for health and beauty businesses and effective retail photography. Next slide, please. And then our next webinar will be on Tuesday, March 16th.
Sorry.
And that's going to be at 10 a.m. And it will be Branding Wyndham, Engaging the Community, Embracing the Future. This will tell the story of the branding process utilized by the town of Wyndham, working with Fitzgerald and Halliday. This process was very successful, primarily because of its dedication to community engagement in embracing their own future. So thank you for attending today. Please help us by completing the evaluation. It's in the chat box, I see. Judith put it there. And we'd love to see you on social media. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and take care of yourselves and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly.